Hello, welcome to the Gavel, where we focus on the federal legislature. I am Terry Ikumi. Now the National Assembly is officially on recess. And while the House of Representatives will resume on the 17th of September, the Senate will be back a week after, and that's on the 24th, mainly because of the extra days spent screening the ministerial nominees. Now our focus on the Gavel this week is on that screening and the issues that arose. Now, within the week under review, the Senate sat twice to conclude the screening exercise, Monday and Tuesday. And afterwards, all 43 nominees were confirmed. That's our first report.
On Monday, the screening of ministerial nominees entered its fourth day with the screening of 9 of the 12 remaining nominees. The screening kicked off at 10:30 a.m. with the screening of the former Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola.
In the power sector, for instance, we set out to achieve initially incremental power with a midterm goal of steady power and ultimately uninterrupted power. We focused essentially on completing what we inherited. And this led us, for example, to recovering 720 containers belonging to the Federal Republic of Nigeria containing transmission equipment that had been left at the Nigerian port for almost a decade. The conversation before the last administration were conversations of lack of projects in various states of the Federation. I think our closing report was that we could say with some pride that there was no state in the Federal Republic of Nigeria where we were not executing at least one federal road. No state.
2 female nominees were asked to bow and go, as has been the case since the screening began. After that, the Senate took a break for an hour.
Sometimes you go all the way, sometimes you do what is needful.
The lawmakers reconvened at 2 p.m. with the screening of the former governor of Osun State, Rauf Aregbesola, who, among other things, proposed a privilege tax for the wealthy in the society.
I will recommend serious taxation for wealthy people in Nigeria. If that will now translate into lifting the burden on the states and the local government to reduce their penchant for taxes that make poor people still give out of their inadequate resource, of course, I will have been satisfied. So I will advocate a just taxation system that will breed inequality in our polity.
New entrants Clement Agba and Godi Agba were also screened by the Senate.
We need to reconfigure our refineries to produce, for one refinery to have produced like 3 grades of crude. We'll have more products. We will now shut up the reason for importing crude. If, for instance, we configure Warri refinery to take in Ima, Escravos, and Kwaibo, we have 32 crudes anyway produced by Nigeria. So if Warri processes 3 crude streams, Port Harcourt processes 3 crude streams, and Kaduna processes 3 crude streams, we'll have more products locally. We won't need to import products, and therefore we'll bridge the gap between importing and at a shorter price and paying extra for those services, which we call subsidy.
If you keep biodegradable materials in one waste bin, those biodegradable materials can be used for fertilizer. You can also use those biodegradable materials to produce energy. But when you mix biodegradable with plastics and medical waste, it becomes difficult to use them.
The next nominee, former Minister of Water Resources, SULEIMAN, while answering questions, spoke on the state of abandoned projects in the ministry.
Most of the ongoing projects that I inherited, that I met in that ministry, contractors went to site sometimes without even knowing the site. And once they picked a site, they would discover that there are so many problems because the necessary investigations were not conducted ab initio to properly plan and assess and quantify what the work should be. And therefore, we found that after some time, contractors would abandon the project, or sometimes, if there is no payment coming, they just let it go. And we end up having so many revised estimated total cost of projects over time in order to be able to complete them. This is what we faced.
The final nominee of the day was a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Geoffrey Onyema, who spoke on the poor treatment of Nigerians abroad, especially the xenophobic attacks in South Africa.
Members of the Nigerian Union of South Africa told me that the problem they were having is that they themselves know the criminal elements among the Nigerian community, and that they would like a situation where they can go to the law enforcement agencies to alert them of those criminals so that action can be taken quickly. But because of the trust deficit between the Nigerians and the South African police, they say that very often, they're not able to work with the South African police. So I think that it's important to get the senior officers in the South African police directly engaged on this matter and to sign this MOU. And that's where I think we also need higher level engagement with them. And of course, the President of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, they've requested formally for a bilateral meeting.
Those against say nay. The ayes have it.
On the final day of the ministerial screening, 40 nominees had been screened, with 3 left.
On the 15th day of January 2018.
But just before the nominees were called in, Senator Philip Aduda, representing the Federal Capital Territory, raised a point of order over the exclusion of the FCT from the ministerial list, just as he did on the first day of the exercise. But this time he had a petition.
I wish, therefore, to submit this petition and to also lay the judgment of the Court of Appeal. And they assume that since the federal government did not appeal this judgment, it is deemed that the federal government had agreed that they will appoint somebody from the FCT. Distinguished colleagues.
Another point of order, drawing the attention of the Senate to 65 people killed by Boko Haram insurgents in Borno State, was raised. And afterwards, the Senate observed a minute's silence for the dead.
May the souls of the deceased rest in perfect peace. Amen.
Then it was time for the main business of the day, the final lap of the ministerial screening. The first 2 nominees responded to questions from 1 lawmaker each, as senators pleaded that they be allowed to take a bow and go.
Whether maybe we don't have good representative from the federal government, maybe this time around. But the case of our roads is something very pathetic.
Let us have the political will and the desire to move forward. 2, let us forge unity among ourselves and organize ourselves for the challenges ahead.
The final nominee to be screened was the former Minister of Information, MOHAMMED. And just like in 2015, he was once again asked to bow and go without any question asked.
They call me all sorts of names there. I used to ignore it until one day when my 7-year-old grandson called me and said, "Grandpa, tell me the truth. Why did they call you Liar Mohammed?" I looked at him. What do you say?
Take a bow.
At the end of the screening exercise, which lasted 5 days, the Senate confirmed the appointment of all 43 nominees as presented by President Muhammadu Buhari.
What we want to achieve is to have a relationship that is based on mutual respect and truth. Once a minister is invited for oversight or any committee activity, I would advise that such a minister attends to the committee.
In total, 20 of the 43 nominees were asked to take a bow and go without being asked a single question by the lawmakers.
Next, we have a special report on what is probably the most controversial fallout of the ministerial screening: the tradition of the Senate to ask nominees who were former lawmakers to take a bow and leave without a single question from any senator.
The screening of 43 ministerial nominees has indeed come and gone, but there are lingering questions over the reliability and potency of the exercise.
Those in favor say aye, those against say nay. The ayes have it.
Critics have questioned the purpose of the exercise, faulting the failure of President Buhari to attach portfolios to the nominees, as well as what they term an abuse of the bow-and-go privilege. Some Nigerians took to social media to express dissatisfaction over the bow-and-go privilege, which is a parliamentary practice of excluding nominees who are former federal lawmakers from vigorous questioning by senators. In the just concluded screening, this privilege was extended to former state legislators, female nominees, second-time ministers, and nominees adjured to have a proven track record of performance in the eyes of the senators.
What other members of the National Assembly have enjoyed, if you agree that by association I am a member, I will appreciate if I enjoy it. Thank you, sir.
A total of 20 out of 43 nominees were asked to bow and go.
Take a bow and go.
In the 8th Senate, the bow and go privilege was extended to the former Minister of Information, Mr. MOHAMMED, despite not being a former federal lawmaker. This privilege was also extended to Mr. Abamoro and Samuel Otom in the 7th Senate and Dr. Jerry AGADA in the 6th Senate, all non-former federal legislators.
You're here interviewing people that are going to be, in charge of Nigeria's critical sections of Nigeria's budget, and you're telling them to bow and go. That is the strongest signal you can send that it is business as usual.
We spoke with the Senate Minority Leader, who appears to not be comfortable with the extension of this privilege to nominees who are not former federal legislators.
I even had to get up and say we're going to have to revisit this. This is not our rule. How we want to cure this now is that we're going to amend our rules. In our rules presently, there is nothing in the rule that talks about the confirmation of minister. So we're going to have to insert it and now put the categories there so that we can be guided by our rules.
But a lawmaker from the ruling party justifies the Senate's action.
Someone like Amechi, with due respect to people that want us to ask him so many questions. For me, if you ask me, I can say that, look, I went through his CV, and most of the things he wanted to stand up and say, I have been in this country, I know what he did, he don't need to tell me.
The unwillingness of President Buhari and indeed former presidents to attach portfolios to ministerial nominees sent to the National Assembly for confirmation is another issue.
Have you ever gone for an interview and you're interviewed by a board of 109 people? It is very inefficient. You have committees. If somebody is supposed to be Minister of Justice, send him to the Justice Committee.
If you do not attach portfolios to them, it puts senators in a position where the relevant questions will not be shot at them. And I think that is wrong.
Going forward, Nigerians would like to see the president attach portfolios to the list of ministerial nominees sent to the National Assembly for confirmation to hopefully make way for a more constructive screening exercise.